Okay. Hi, I see we have about 33 attendees, so welcome everybody. We want to get started for this evening's discussion. Very interesting one. So the topic being, how do we fix, or what do we have to do to fix the city of Joburg? So my name's Wayne Duvenage. I'm the CEO of OUTA, the organization ending tax abuse. I'll be the host, facilitating the session this evening. And joining me is Neeshan Balton, the executive director of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. And Neeshan has been on in a number of organizations, a very active citizen, one of the founding members of Defend Our Democracy as well, and has also been inside the belly of the beast within the city of Joburg, but that was a number of years ago when it was running well. Maybe we need to send you back there, Neeshan. So thank you for joining us this evening. And joining him is Julius Kleynhans, OUTA's executive manager for local government division. And it has a number of initiatives tied to it, which Julius looks after. And the more recent one is the launching of the JoburgCAN, the Joburg Community Action Network. So let me just start off by setting the scene a little bit, because I don't want us to get into a long list of the problems. I think we know what they are in the city of Joburg. The potholes get bigger, and the water leaks and the water supply issues get worse. Roadsides, signs, and the road markings, blocked sewers. It just doesn't seem to be getting any better, and if anything, it's getting worse. And inner city decay, crime, corruption, vandalism, misspending, and corruption seems to be the order of the day. And one might understand this if the city had a stagnant or declining revenue stream, but they don't. Their income from their various revenue streams, and there are a number of them, have grown significantly by an average of just under 10% over the last decade per annum. And if the average inflation rate has been around 5.2% for that same period on average per annum, you can understand that they've got far better increases than they should have. And that's from you and I, the taxpayer, the rates payer. So if it's not a lack of funds, then what is it, and what can be done about it? And we want to talk at a strategic level. Now, if you understand that we live in a democracy, we have our elections every 5 years, and we would like to think that people who are elected to manage our cities and towns on our behalf would do so with the competence and the passion and the energy, and in the best interests of citizens. But we know that's not the case. We've had, and it appears to be a leadership issue. Especially what highlights that, obviously, is the fact that we've had several mayors over the last 7 years, and that in itself is a problem. But we also know that the world of government is changing around us, not only here internationally, but in South Africa, it certainly is becoming a challenge. Local government is not what it seems to be anymore. We have politicians that are interfering, and that's one of the problems, and one of the questions I think we need to grapple with this evening is how do we tackle this? What we do know, though, is that a lot of people have invested in the city. It is still the country's economic hub, and it's not a case of, well, let's just up and leave. People can't do that. The vast majority can't. So immigration is a short-term solution. It's not the answer. So what we do need to do is fix. We've got businesses that have invested here. We've got people that have invested here, families, and there is a beauty and there's a history in the city that I think we want to restore and cherish, and make sure that we don't allow it just to go to waste. So, Neeshan, I'm going to hand over to you for a few minutes. Give us your thoughts around this topic, and then we'll flesh out some of the nuggets, watch for some of the comments from the viewers, the participants this evening, a number of heads and leaders within community associations around the city. And it's good to be speaking to people at that level to get some insights and to share our insights as to where do we go to from here. We've got an hour, not a lot of time, and there's quite a bit to get through. We know there's no silver bullet. We know there's no one single issue, but we need to come up with solutions as opposed to complaining about the problems, which we are very aware of. Neeshan, over to you.
Okay, Wayne. No, thank you very much. As you said, I used to be a councillor in the city in the early 90s, in the pre-interim as well as the interim period. What is striking about that period is the degree to which the old city council officials and leaders, and as well as those who represented communities who were not in the city, were able to come together to begin to work on how to transform the city and change it. Ian Davidson, Cyril Ramaphosa headed up the transitional council with Van Zyl Slabbert as the mediator. And when I look back, I think that's what was a critical area for how we might get out of the problems we're in, because there are elements where the city needs to collaborate in the way in which it governs with those who are not part of the political structures of the city. So that's the first point. But I think the second point is that myself and perhaps many others have not paid sufficient attention to the details of what's happening in the city. We focused a lot on national government, the SOCs and the bigger things, the Guptas and everybody else. And we didn't realize, as Ferial Haffage said, that city capture has actually been happening in Johannesburg and perhaps other metros and municipalities across. The consequences of that is what we now see. Poor governance, poor leadership has resulted in the dysfunctionality and deteriorating levels of services that we now need to arrest. And we need to arrest it in ways that I suppose we will discuss, but primarily it's a level of active citizenry that we need to develop and not let go of ever again. Otherwise, we get back to square one. Thanks, Wayne.
Thank you very much for that, Neeshan, and we will. I think we need to get into the discussion of what do we mean by active citizenry. You speak of collaboration, and I think one of the challenges we have is that you can't just march in, this notion of, well, let's remove them, but you can't just do that. You can't go in and throw the current lot out unless you do it through legal processes, and those are one of the options we need to talk about. So you have the government you have voted for, you've put into power. I know a lot of people say, well, I didn't put them there. They're there. They've been voted in democratically. And there's a lot of issues around electoral reform and how the whole system plays out in a way that seems very often so skewed. But here we are, and I think active citizenry is one of those issues that I think we are a bit guilty of. The city has been hijacked, so to speak. There's city capture, quite right. The same modus operandi at national has flowed all the way down to local. But what do we do about it as citizens? Julius, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. And I think just to add to what Neeshan is saying, and what you're saying, we're living in a democracy, and I don't think everyone realizes the rights and responsibilities that come with that. And I've posted a bit of a screenshot, quick, quoting legislation. And one of the objects of local government, the last element, is it's basically local government are to encourage the involvement of communities and community organizations in the matters and the business of local government. It's supposed to serve a specific purpose of service delivery. That's what its whole mandate is about. And what's been largely lacking is community participation. I don't think people really understand that they have to participate in elements such as the integrated development plan and the budget process meaningfully. And then after that, create the ability to have oversight on how the money is spent. Obviously, legislation's been written in this country with good intentions, and I think the Constitution and local government legislation, whether complex or not, is very good. But it hasn't really made way for municipalities that fail or corrupt people to be in charge. So I think we've got to a point where we can definitely see that we cannot complain about not getting services if we pay for it. but not doing an alternative thing. And just to explain that, you know, if you look at the last decade, municipalities have been failing. It hasn't been something that's been happening overnight. And this has happened to a number of reasons. But, you know, we got to a point now where we need to start recreating our ways of approaching it as civil society to see meaningful change. So we cannot just pay and expect a service to come. We've seen that that doesn't happen. So what are the alternatives and the ways to fixing it now? And I think that's the kind of stuff we need to get into now. Thanks.
Thank you, Julius. So here's the notion, and I guess if you just look nationally right down to local, nationally you get poor education, so those who can afford it, and the reality is the poor will always suffer, because those who can afford it will introduce their own education, private education, medical aids, private security, but you still pay the same tax, so you get less back. Same thing at local government. You start introducing your own energy resources. I see some communities doing their own waste removals and boreholes, water, but you still pay your same tax. So, and then what happens is this active citizenry, this notion of active citizenry is a broad one, but a very important one. And some communities are doing excellent work. Excellent work. And you just read about it all the time. Even within Joburg, read a good article in the Daily Maverick on the Yeovil communities who've really cleaned up and broadly and deeply. They've gone and really made their proud to be residents and cleaned up that their wards and suburbs. But the local government authorities love that, don't they? I mean, imagine that we all fixed our own potholes, we fixed the water leaks, we clean up, we cut the grass, and the money comes in. So they don't need tractors. They don't need to repair potholes anymore because the citizens are doing it. That's the danger. So I'm not saying we don't or shouldn't do that. Those are some of the options. But is that a sustainable option? What should we do differently to hold them to account? Because what you can't do is keep doing these things while you pay the same taxes. We might touch on the topic of a tax revolt. I know it's a big call. It's a sensitive call. It's an emotional call. We've seen what's happened in eThekwini, and there are dangers in that. There are extreme dangers in that, because when they fail, you know, spectacularly, and the problems that arise from that are huge. So we might touch on it. I think it's a whole topic for another day, but it is an option, and it's a last resort, a desperate option. But only if it's done legally and well controlled, because if you don't get the law on your side on that, you lose completely. So going back to this active citizenry, Neeshan, give us your thoughts and ideas of what do we do to become active citizens, because I think you and Julius reflected on it, that, you know, I think, yes, we were focused at local, national for so long. And then what happens is this undercurrent in our city got worse and worse, and we complain and we build our walls higher, we gate off our communities, and we complain, but it doesn't change things. So what do we mean? What is the different type of active citizenry that we're going to have to unpack and introduce to make a difference? Neeshan?
So let me give you a couple of examples. There's a place called Fine Town in the deep south of Johannesburg.
Yeah.
This community today is one of the few where people have organized themselves in every street. They have street committees. Those street committees do patrols because there's no police station there. But it hasn't stopped people from demanding a police station in that area. For over 5 years, they had a government-built clinic that was built but not opened. The community then undertook a series of meetings internally to talk about why this was important, understood its importance for themselves, organized huge petitions, huge calls to provincial government, because it was its facility, started engaging the MEC online and offline, in council and outside of council, I mean, in the legislature, raised it as questions in the legislature, and eventually public pressure forced the provincial government to open that clinic. But opening it today with a set of service delivery standards, which allows people to then begin to measure the levels of service and to know how, if those levels of services deteriorate, who they must hold accountable. Now it's a whole new chapter of accountability work that they will have to begin to do. And building on that kind of a model, I think there are ways in which it could be replicated across the length and breadth of the city. You know, if you take places like Chicago and others, they have gone to the point of actually delegating some functions and resources to citizens. And in that case, the accountability work is the other way around. It's the city that holds the citizens accountable for things that have been delegated to them. So I think there's ways in which that active citizenry can be meaningful and can be powerful. The biggest constraint we have is a city government that is dysfunctional. It is a coalition that doesn't work. We've read reports here of MMCs almost coming to blows in the meetings because they are at loggerheads over we don't know what. And that dysfunctionality makes any meaningful engagement about partnerships and collaboration difficult. So in the first instance, it is our view that we have to get rid of this dysfunctional leadership that governs this city at this point in time. It might not be the best solution, but it's the solution that allows us to at least engage in a meaningful way. And if you direct pressure, you know against whom you're directing that pressure. At this point in time, I wouldn't know who's accountable for what in the city as we speak.
So let's talk about that. Trying to be heard by the council members. Again, we can't barge in. What are the options we have as citizens to make ourselves be heard by the councillors? Protest action is one. I'm sure we had the protest action earlier this week on the water issues. I guess the weather kept a lot of people away, but there were two protest actions taking place on the water issues, a group of 500 people discussing this, and 50 rock up. So, you know, these are the types of things we need to talk about, and not everybody can protest, not everybody can take off, but protest is peaceful protest, constructive protest, shining the spotlight on the issues in the faces of local government has a place. What else can we do, Neeshan, to get the message across to our councillors?
Well, I think there's a number of things. You know, from a street level, and this is stuff that we're trying to do. Is almost every street today has a chat group. But I think what each of those street groups need to do is to know who in the city is responsible for what services in their street, who to call when the lights go out, the street lights don't work, the water flows unattended, and so forth. And I'm talking about not only the CEO of City Parks or Joburg Water and so forth, but down to the depot manager who has a responsibility to deal with those things. And then it would be for the street to then start putting pressure at that level. Because I think when we all start doing that for people who are getting paid at the lowest levels to do their work, they will then feel that pressure and escalate it to their superiors if it's issues that's not within their control. And failing that, we would then, is the second level of accountability, which is really understanding where are resources allocated. Do each of these regions and their depots have the budgets to do what needs to be done in all of our areas? We need to be then monitoring that expenditure and hold people accountable for what they have resources to do. Where they don't have the resources, we then need to force the city to begin to reprioritize where it is necessary. So I think building up from the street to the ward to the community level All of these are possible given the tools that that OUTA has now developed around the service delivery monitoring. We would be able to do scorecards at a ward level and at a citywide level. Because when we do that in a coordinated way, you either embarrass people and you shame them into doing what is required, or it is a tool to force them out of office.
Okay. Thank you. So, yeah, good points there. Coordinating, putting them under pressure, putting the spotlight on. I think it's all good. Majority of people will say they really just don't care. You can't shame them because there is no shame. But I hear you. There's one thing we do, you must know, and that is when people are held accountable, when people are exposed for failure to do their jobs or failure to deliver services, and they are, charged with misconduct, they too have friends, they too have family members, they too have children who come back from school, and the pressure is on. Let me tell you, it's not like they don't care and they don't feel the pain. The pain is felt in many ways. So there are many ways to hold people to account and put that pressure on. And I guess those are some of them that you're talking about, Neeshan, is let's start exposing. That in itself takes work. That in itself takes time. That in itself takes resources. And I guess we need to get into that discussion as well. Julius, over to you on active citizenry. What do you feel we should be discussing? And those were good examples that Neeshan gave around Finetown. Putting so much heat on the authorities to finish the clinics, to contemplate where they do put up a police station, to have their street committees, and knowing who exactly to put pressure on, who to phone, and where they need to go. I guess I know a lot of communities have those street chat groups. They know who to talk to. Some of them have got great relationships. Some of them have got good councillors, ward councillors who do a lot of work. Some don't. And there's a lot of learning to be done. That I can assure you. Julius will probably touch on that in his experience in JoburgCAN, where the networking is extremely powerful. Julius, over to you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Wayne. And just to add to Sean's example, where communities and streets are organized, and then in those suburbs, and then eventually even in wards and connect with their neighbors, that's really powerful. So we need that weight in communities. And what we found, both Sean and in their engagements with the public and through our initiatives, Wayne, there's a lot of issues that are common across a variety of communities throughout the city of Johannesburg. So there's a lot of things that people can stand for as a collective, and I think that's very important. So we need to get communities much better organized. They need to be able to identify the resources within their ambit. We like referring to the 3 T's of organized communities. It's time, tithe, and talent. Each of us have that. If you don't have money, at least you have the other 2, time and talent, or one of the 3. And I think that's how active citizenry needs to evolve. Each of us must do our little part, and in an area that we are interested in. But the energy currently in the city of Johannesburg, sadly, there's a lot of crises happening, but there's a groundswell of communities that want to get involved and be part of something. And as a collective, I think if we channel that energy in the right direction, we can really see meaningful change. But we have to do this responsibly. And I think that's where we can start taking ownership in our communities and over these issues. So I think part of this, we need to start structuring full-time capacity to an extent, because most folks have activities they need to deal with in the day. And I think from an oversight perspective, as Sean also mentioned, that you need to understand what the issues are in your community, what the budget allocation is. But further to that then, which he touched on, is who's getting the contract, when's it supposed to be completed, how much money has been allocated, and that's the kind of oversight we in our organized communities and residents associations and forums need to start exercising to hold the individuals, not only the councillor to account, but also the people who are supposed to do the jobs. I think relationships are also very important. There's a lot of good officials and people that are, I suppose, just as frustrated as any resident in the city. And we need to start building relationships with these individuals to start seeing how we can back them to do their jobs, and also partner with them as far as we can, because we know councillors come and go, and hopefully in the near future we'll see the corrupt officials leaving as well. And then where there's solutions, and this is a beauty that we've started witnessing by building a network of organized communities. You've got communities who have already solved problems, and just because they are introduced to their neighbors, all of a sudden no one has to pay those school fees again, because they can just be introduced on those solutions. So when we talk about community problems, we come up with solutions. We need to look at scalability and how we can introduce that to everyone across the city and even across the country eventually to help take back ownership of their communities. And then finally, I just want to touch on something when it comes to other projects, that we need to look at, is how do we bring about accountability, but also strategic litigation. I know every time someone sees OUTA, they're thinking there can be a legal fight, but that's always the last resort. So when we look at litigation, we need to determine how can that shape the future to ensure that this groundswell of organized citizenry can really have a precedent-setting case that can shape the future of proper service delivery. And I think that's really important. But I think Sean will also touch on it now, where communities are well organized, and it comes to 2026, I think there's also alternatives one can look at.
Thank you. Nice points there. I want to touch on some of those strategic litigation, but just a couple of points and viewers' points that are raised that Dino just talks about or asks, is city capture a reality? Absolutely, Dino. It happens the same way as it does at national government. The fleet contracts are handed over to connected cronies. They put massive markups on companies that get tenders to do roads in the city, traffic lights, maintenance. There's so much corruption that is taking place. The property company that the city has. I mean, the city has I'm not sure what the actual number is, but it's well over 10 different companies that it's set up, and each one of those companies has boards, and so much money flows to connected people from City Power, Joburg Water, property companies, and so on. City of Cape Town has one outside company. Well, it's outside; it's still part of the municipality, but the municipality does all the other work, and I think that's a concern, but city capture is real, and it's costing the city a lot of money. To Ezekiel Kekana's question, let's talk about co-governing, because you mentioned that, and I see, Julius and I were talking the other day. There's a town in the north of KZN who have a co-governing arrangement with the local community. Business people, small town, retired business people have come and helped to run the city's finances, or the town's finances. The money goes into a trust account, and they pay, and they ensure that the best service providers are selected, and a lot of savings taking place in that type of co-governing. Now, that's as a mutual agreement type of co-governing, and it would be nice if we could get that. It's not necessarily going to be the case all the time. It's easier in smaller towns. It's very difficult in an economy of 62 billion rand, the size of Gauteng or Joburg, which is has the budget of the size of a small country in Africa. So these are some of the challenges. Co-governing can be forced, and I think litigation as an option, strategic litigation, is definitely an option that we have to look at. As we always say at OUTA, it's a last resort. It's very costly, But it has to happen sometimes. And it's happened in many towns in South Africa across the country. We've seen it in Makanda. We've seen it in a couple of the other smaller municipalities up at Costa, Sunnyhof and other places where you can get court orders to take over. But it's very often a temporary solution until the next election or until a new council comes into space. What we did hear in the midterm budget speech today is the minister speaking about, and we are hearing this coming out, about public-private partnerships, about business working with and civil society and government and local government to take over the management of water treatment plants, wastewater works, and so forth, in order to ensure the stability and the expertise is put in place to manage these. And I think that's what we are going to see a lot of in Joburg. I mean, in our local government space, and Joburg won't be exempt from that, is how do we bring about co-governing through a creative and constructive approach to government. So this is where civil society has to be networked and approach local government with solutions and demands, and then litigate if need be. So those are some of the things I think we should unpack a little bit more. And I'll get to some of the other questions that have come in. So back to you, Neeshan. This coordination or co-governing concept that you spoke about in Chicago and other places, how do you feel in the city of Joburg this is going to happen? I know that we've all reached out to the local management, but they tend to shut off. They are bombarded. And the easiest way to deal with this plethora of noise and complaints that comes at them is to just shut down. But so often below them, there are a lot of good people in local government. There are a lot of good people in the city of Joburg that do want to make a difference, that do their best. Is that an avenue to possibly look at?
I think your starting point is right, is not to paint all 40,000 people who work in the city with the same brush. There are extremely competent, capable, and people who just want to make the city work. And we need to be able to find out who they are, and create the platforms for at least talking and canvassing ideas. I think that there are different kinds of ways in which people co-govern. Sometimes it's around issues of budgets, budget allocations, and there are major cities in the world, and surprisingly, a lot of them in the US, where you would find budget forums that have citizens and representatives of citizens with the city talking about where the priorities are or need to be. Now, I think we are a long way off from that. But I want to give you one example. In the early years of local government, in a place called Lenasia South, as a council, we gave control of the civic center to a community to look after, to manage, and to maintain with the funds that they were then getting out of that. For about a year or two, they did an incredibly good job. All of that was not privatized, was reinvested back into that facility. But for some reason, there was a change of view in the city administration after that, and that was completely taken away. What the result is, there's no sense of ownership over that facility. And when I last saw it, it was in a terrible state, not able to maintain itself. And that goes across the length and breadth of the city. Now, if there was a different approach to public partnerships, not necessarily public-private partnerships, but the issue of public partnerships, then there would be a sense of ownership over infrastructure. So you won't walk by when you see somebody breaking a traffic light and walking down the street, because then it becomes yours. And that lack of ownership is what has resulted in the kind of destruction that we witness and do nothing about. So there are higher levels of partnerships in terms of people then sitting in on policy forums with the city, negotiating policy issues, negotiating budgets, negotiating priorities. This is what the IDPs were meant to have been doing. But the IDPs have become a very distorted form of public participation. And I think that those are the avenues that can possibly be changed to back to what they were probably meant to be. The same would go with ward committees. I think they could be incredibly powerful forums, both for participation as well as for accountability, if they were less depoliticized and if they were not the kind of standard 10-person structure. I think these are avenues that we can explore for greater participation and involvement. I think lastly, when, yesterday the council had a meeting. There was a formal council meeting. I was just going through the agenda prior to this meeting here. And it struck me that none of us would have gone through what was being discussed in the city in advance, what was decisions that were being made. We won't even know after that meeting what decisions have been made and how those are going to be implemented. And that's where areas of oversight and higher levels of involvement will need to be done if we want to shift the city. Our absence in its formal structures and formal meetings, I think, weakens our ability to then influence and shape its direction. Now, it is hard work, it is frustrating work, but it's work that we are going to have to find a way of how to do if we even want to talk about, at some point, co-governing the city. It requires levels of involvement first to get to that point. Thanks.
Yeah, no, good point. And I guess this has been discussed and is starting to be actioned, which is why we have these networks now, these bigger networks that are starting to set up to fund full-time people that are going to represent civil society. Because you're quite right, we're entitled to go to council meetings. They can't keep you out of those. The law is on the public side. Many people don't know that. We need to be there to hear the decisions and then to start asking the questions as to why they aren't following up on some of these decisions and how they arrive at some of these decisions, especially in the integrated development plans, the budgeting sessions. So what is required and where citizens have been missing is this active involvement, active visibility, active pressure, questioning, and understanding of what exactly the city is about. But as you say, it's not easy work. It doesn't just happen. It's not a case of a couple of volunteers just rocking up. This has to be structured. It has to be driven with purpose, and it has to be financed, because you don't do this type of full-time work on volunteers. You can for a time, but volunteers are here today and gone tomorrow because they have other opportunities that come, and which is part of the reason why OUTA's success has had longevity of people on long-term projects, because you've got to pay market-related salaries. But I want to get onto, you touched on a couple of things which a couple of our viewers have raised. Wendy speaks about the difficulties of a councillor and being there herself and seeing her latest councillor. The city is not answerable to councillors. They have the pleasure of being in council meetings where they can, and oversight committees and that, but they are accountable to their party and not necessarily to their community. But I would add that the community put them there. The community have voted those people in, and they are accountable, and they have to assist their community members. But it's very, very difficult for them. They find themselves in the ham in the sandwich, getting it in the neck from their residents, as well as trying to enact and speak about the change that's required in their specific area. And unless they have the ear of the people who have the powers to do things, nothing happens, and they're not answered to, and they're ignored. And it's we hear this problem all the time. Josie asks a good question. I think we need to get a little bit into that, but it is a topic that can be explored in greater depth. And I know that the Action for Accountability teams that Neeshan heads up and Julius is the JoburgCAN are doing a lot of this, Josie. And it is, how do we reflect more on the case studies, on the how-to examples to do things differently, to collaborate. and to bring about the solutions, the citizen-based solutions, because that's really what it is coming down to. As a failing city, you've got to dig in, you've got to support each other. You get your street communities, your ward communities, your multiple ward communities, and these bigger collectives that can start to do things differently and think big. Think of one communal tractor shared by 15 wards to do grass cutting on certain days, about people painting lines, about people having a central space to book, to get a pothole repair organization that comes along and does the work. Now, I know the city says you can't do it. Well, we will challenge them on that. But there are dangers in doing it yourself. There are safety issues. It doesn't mean to say we can't, as citizens, start putting those processes in place. And these are things that we are thinking about. I can tell you now that we could fix potholes at about a third of the price of the city. And you can hold the city to account. You can get them to pay you for that work. But there's a process that has to follow. You don't do it and then tell them to pay you. You have to notify them. You have to show that you've notified them. Then you have to get 3 quotes. Then you do the repair, and then you put in the court order challenge to get them to pay you. If you did that collectively, that's how communities start building their abilities to start doing the fixing and not letting the city get away with it, but getting them to pay for it as well. It's hard work, that, and it's lengthy, and it requires administration skills and processes, but it is the most effective way you do that, right down to fixing water leaks and so forth. So that's a discussion on for another day, and I think we want to get into that and into the meat of it. Julius, I know that you are talking about having that how-to guideline and case studies that we're going to put up on the JoburgCAN website. Is that right?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of content that's available for people to become active citizens, and Action for Accountability has actually also created very nice digestible information for people to become active citizens and how to responsibly participate. But I think what is important, and I've touched on it earlier, is to unpack solutions and look at the scalability of them. Now, different communities, different areas, obviously each case and problem needs to be viewed on its own merits. But yes, that's exactly the kind of information we want to share with people. I think what everyone needs to understand is that the problem in the city of Johannesburg is so big, no specific organization will be able to fix it. No change in political power will just come in and fix it. This is going to take time, and it's going to take a collective effort from civil society, business, and government to fix it. And I think that's where people need to start understanding, how does local government work? What is our role in local government? Those are the basics, but then you need to go into the intermediate stuff, like our water is off, what must I do? Instead of just phoning the person that's in charge, what's the kind of letters that I need to write, a letter of demand? Dr. Ferrell Adam of the WaterCAN initiative, how can I test the water to ensure that it is clean, without relying on the state of doing a PI application, waiting 3 months to get the results, then it's too late. So I think we need to start empowering communities and empowering ourselves to have more meaningful participation, and where we lack those skills, to tap into the right skills. And I think something you've touched on, and there are good councillors out there, so please don't take this wrong, but a systemic issue in South Africa today is where councillors don't have the financial business acumen to even read financial statements, but they've got oversight on the municipalities' management and expenditure. And these are the kind of expertise, and when I speak about time, talent, and tithe, the talent of individuals that we need to start attracting to participate from an active citizenry point of view. So who are the financial gurus out there that can have oversight on the budgets, on the monthly financials, to sit in those council meetings? Who are the engineers in our communities that can do an analysis on on the requirements for the potholes? Who are the passionate environmentalists that can help challenge the pollution or the refuse issues within our community? And all of a sudden, you'll start seeing how beautiful this community building element can become. But also you'll realize how far civil society has already come in governing in their own communities, you know, if I can almost put it like that. So I think that's very important, Wayne. And you know, I know both Action for Accountability and JoburgCAN have a lot of these kind of resources and information available. Open Up, you know, has also created a lot of good information and things. And part of you know, the coordination, I think, and our responsibility as OUTA and Ahmed Kathrada Foundation and JoburgCAN and Action for Accountability is to partner with the right people, with the right cases or the right proven concepts, and expose that to the rest of the South Africa, not only Johannesburg, so that everyone's got access. And the last thing I just wanted to touch on in that is it's very important that we start knowing our neighbors, you know, even just in a street committee. It's sad, people don't even know their neighbors these days. But we've seen in the organized communities where they start knowing their community organizations that's in the next suburb next to them, how many solutions already exist and how they can learn from each other. And I think that's something we need to really duplicate as far as we can.
Yeah. Thank you for that, and I think that's a good point. So to the network out there, this collaborative and collective learning is going to be shared more and more, and we've got to move and do this a lot faster. But this neighborliness we talk about, Julius, it extends to, as you say, your next community, and not only your communities, your rate-paying communities, but we have a lot of indigent communities who have bigger problems than the rate-paying communities. And I know that some will say, yeah, but they get their water and electricity free. That's not the point. The point is that they don't have sanitation. They have sewage running through their houses. They don't have roads even for potholes. And it is our collective responsibility and the funding mechanisms of our society and the way local government is built, that those funds are shared and shared in a manner that tries to uplift due to the social ills of the spatial development problems that we have in South Africa. So it's a collective problem. It's not a case of living in silos, because that's a recipe for disaster. So that is the reason why you have Sandton, which was once, and Randburg, which was once Bryanston, all different community or different municipalities amalgamating into a metro, so that you don't have the haves just looking after their patch and the have-nots have nothing and don't get anywhere. And we've got a lot of work to do in that space. But I think the neighborliness is about understanding the problems, understanding that their communities can work together with your communities. We saw that in Makanda, the unemployed people's movement, working so well with the Ratepayer Association and the Business Chamber to bring about a legal case. And it was because of that collective work and the input that the judge heard from all of those communities across all sectors of society that gave them the muscle to get the court order that they sought. And that's the type of collaboration that I think we are looking for here. So I like that idea of the collective, Julius, and that's what we need to explore. We need to really get more of the sharing out there. So as we go into the final minutes, we've got 10 more minutes now. Neeshan, so we can't force our way in. We know that we can do a lot more, and we are doing a lot more. Listening to the stories that you're sharing, listening to the stories that we've heard from other heads of resident associations who just are working with, they've got through their local council, they've found a way to meet with the Metro Police, for instance, to start removing illegal signage, to start cleaning up their suburbs. They're really encouraging to hear that. And I think this notion of, well, I pay my tax, so I shouldn't have to do it, needs to be rethought. It's almost as if we feel we are entitled, so we can sit back. But if Rome is burning, we got to get involved. We cannot complain. We can complain and direct that in a constructive way to make sure that those who are supposed to do the work here, but then what do you do about that? So we've got to keep the pressure up, shining the light, but at the same time, enable and empower those who want to get involved in your areas to do the work of cleaning up, of fixing up, and gathering the information and gathering the data. And one of our viewers here talks about data, gathering data. Do you want to talk a little bit about the Link app as an option, Julius? I mean, we're developing technology that can help to expose the shortfalls of cities and the scorecards that we spoke of earlier on, and developing scorecards. But what do you do with that information? It's good to have it. See, the council is also launching its app now, but how do they work, and what can we do with that information? Julius?
Sure. Look, I think gathering intelligence is also always important, and the trust from the public just on the information they receive from any government these days is questionable. So I think it's very important. The standards have really dropped a lot in municipalities. If you look at benchmarks on turnaround time, drinking water needs to be accessible when it's off within 24 hours. I think the guidelines and legislation says that water should not be off for more than, altogether 7 days in any calendar year. So I think in Joburg alone, in the last month, those 7 days as a collective has already been exceeded quite substantially. The same with Pothole, what's the turnaround time on that? And it seems like every year or second year, that time gets extended. And I think we need to start measuring that and applying pressure. And I think, Neeshan, I think we need to start making it uncomfortable for these individuals. We need to start shining the spotlight on their performance, because there are performance agreements. And we also know that when they fall short of those agreements, they get adjusted in other meetings so that everyone qualifies for a bonus at the end of the year. These things are manipulated where civil oversight is not existent. And I think that's where we need to step in. So with the intelligence gathering, one start creating heat maps throughout communities on where the problems are, what those problems are. And you've got the right kind of information to apply pressure. This also allows for you to be in a position to start tracking progress. So I think one of the worst things should be to be a good official, working your butt off, and you're just getting negative comments all the time. You are never good enough. But imagine if one can get to a point where staff morale can be lifted because they get the kudos from the public saying, I've locked this pothole 2 days ago. Julius fixed it. Well done, 5-star on your performance. I think if we can get to that kind of smart city concept, you're really going to change the future of service delivery. But sadly, I think the political dynamics have brought our city to its knees. And this is where we need to start innovating and putting some good technology to use. We must make it free to the public and accessible to everyone so that we can transparently have oversight and seeing the performance on these dashboards where the city is not performing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Julius. Neeshan, the Joburg Crisis Alliance, tell us a little bit more about that, where we're going with that, and what do you think will come of that?
Yeah, before I get into that, let me just make this point. Pressure, you might not think, or many might not think that pressure has not been working in the city. We've been monitoring where we have these local accountability forums. The responsiveness of the city has been changing. You just have to look at the uproar and the protest over water and look at what has happened with Joburg Water's communications in the last 4 to 5 weeks. It is almost daily now that there's a higher level of communication about what the problem is and what they're trying to do and so forth. It's small signals, but the pressure is, I think, beginning to work. And if we continue focusing on specific areas, you've seen the minister coming in, intervening on water. You've suddenly seen Joburg Water and Rand Water trying to appear to be more open to collaborating and working with people. And we need to use those pressure points to now get them to the tables to confirm service level standards, as well as accountability mechanisms and penalties for non-performance. Because I think that those are the steps where we need to go. I think what this discussion has raised is that we can do everything in our localities, but if we don't have some way of all these initiatives linking up across the city and then doing the work that benefits all of us collectively, whether it's research, policy advocacy, monitoring budgets, looking at legal issues, as well as the massive education about what local government is that is required, then I think the local efforts are not going to reap the benefits that is. And that's what the Joburg Crisis Alliance possibly could become. What it is at this point is 2 convenings have taken place to get people to understand the magnitude of the crisis, to also agree that the starting point is to advocate for the change of the governance system in the city, for one that is perhaps more stable and which allows us to do all the things that we are talking about in this meeting. Because with an unstable coalition, none of this is possible. And that's where we are. We are convening again on the 25th of November to take those discussions forward, to increase the levels of collaboration and awareness of who's doing what work and where, and then collectively to decide on the priorities for 2024. Thanks, Wayne.
Great. Lovely stuff. And I think that starts to get into the summary. So I just want to wrap up now. So we have this Joburg Crisis Alliance. It is the culmination of a number of groups. And what I see is, and this is the call, I think, that we're putting out there, what citizens should be doing, residents in towns and cities, is join your local community, whatever that is. There's a local community association, be it a ratepayers association, be it a local business chamber, if you have small businesses, to then ask them, what are they collectively doing about their area and what they're doing about networking the next level up. And the likes of the Action for Accountability, the Inner City Precinct initiative that's taking place in Joburg, the JoburgCAN initiative and others. There are these bigger groupings that are now forming this crisis alliance. And through that, we have extreme collective power. So that we can do the things that we should be doing, is giving that input into the integrated development plan, because we should be giving our input. We should be then having our oversight. We should be monitoring the budgets. We should be questioning the increases in salaries. And all of this happens when we put our effort and resources collectively into it. So I think taking what's coming out of this session is that less moaning, keeping their feet to the fire, holding local government to account by putting pressure, because the pressure does work. It doesn't work everywhere. We know and we can see, and our viewers are saying the water, the sudden, and there has been a massive increase in the focus and the accountability around water issues, but it doesn't happen everywhere at the same time or to the same effort, but it's happening nonetheless. So I think if we can take away the lessons from this session, and we will have more sessions as we start to digest around how do we introduce these various initiatives. It is about also sharing best practice, and it's about putting that out there through the various community action forums that we have, and start to get people to understand how they can play a role, how they can play a meaningful role, because there's no doubt that the city has got no option, and they're going to have to start to listen more to their residents, but they're not going to listen willingly. And so they're going to have to it's also a case of how do you take this horse to the water and make it drink? Well, we got to find the ways to do that. There's no silver bullet here. I think we are in a very exciting space, and it is a bit late. We should have probably been where we are and getting culminating and galvanizing civil society solutions years ago. But here we are, and now things are moving in the right direction. But we've got a lot of work to do. There is so much that has to be done to get our city management to work for its people. And as you said, Neeshan, coalition governments are with us now for the rest for a long time to come, and they are struggling to find their feet and find their way. And we have to be part of those solutions. We have to find ways to co-govern, to be part of those solutions, and to put them under pressure when they are failing, and to gather the data. So lots to be done. Lots is starting to be done. And I think we look forward to another one of these discussion points in a few weeks' time. We're going to have some regular discussions and start bringing these solutions together. Final words from you, Julius, and then final words from yourself, Neeshan, and then we'll close.
Thanks, Wayne. Yeah, just thanks for everyone for your time. And I just want to echo what Wayne said. You know, the best thing is to start, just get involved. You know, a lot of the audience are already in the committees of organized communities, but them I would like to encourage also to start reaching out to your neighbors. And I think there's a lot of work to do. This is not going to be an overnight solution, but we need to make sure that as a collective we take hands and fix the problems, and not let the political powers divide us. Thank you.
Neeshan?
No, Wayne, I think the Springbok banner that you have behind you really epitomizes what we need to be doing. Is that determination to build collectively, and to deal with the problems in the way in which they did. Because I don't think that the problems of the city are insurmountable. I think the creativity that exists in this city is enormous. We need to create the space for the best brains and the most talented people to come forward, and for their solutions to be able to work. And I think it's possible if we find a way of working across the things that divide us, whether it's race, class, gender, religion. We should be able to then do what's best for the city collectively. Thanks.
Yeah. And I just want to remind on that point alone, and I think our Springbok showed us, but even prior to this match, we are more united than our politicians would like us to believe we are. We are more united than we think we are. And the research does show that, but we need to put that collective power together. There's been a lot of good comments, and I want to thank the viewers for being constructive, for being positive, and participating in this session tonight. We're going to take a lot of that input. We're going to answer some of your questions and queries, but there's a lot of good insights there to share as well. So watch the space going forward. Thanks again for your time to Ivor Cleary and the team that put the webinar together, and for all of you for coming on and being part of the show. Thanks again. We'll join you again, and we'll let you know soon.
Thanks. Cheers. And greetings to everybody.
Bye now.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.